Okay, we are live. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Cloud Security Alliance UK chapter. We have this is the fourth of a series of 6 talks. So today, just move on to the next slide. Right, Sean. So we're here to champion the Cloud Security Alliance's mission in the UK. We have a very active UK membership. We do engage with a broad set of stakeholders. We champion cloud training, education and awareness in the UK. We do survey the needs of UK members, hence this is why we're having this series of talks on identity in cloud and zero trust. We also have we're here to deliver a research programme, and there's more details about that on our website. So for today's talk, this is, as mentioned, this is a series of 6 lunchtime talks. So today's the 4th talk, and today's talk is going to be presented by Sean Turner. He's our very own co-chair for the Cloud Security Alliance chapter, and that he is talking about extending identity in the cloud today. And Sean is the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer at TwinStake as well. So handing over to yourself, Sean. We'll see you soon.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. Let me see if I can get to the next slide. So we're talking about extending concept of identity and identity management into the cloud. And I've been following the series so far. Paul made a fantastic point in the last episode, as it were. And that point was about identity and access management, IAM versus identity management. I was sort of, introduced to it as identity management and always thought of it as that. And the idea that identities, flow and they represent entities, and that ideally you don't like automatically bundle access management into this, so some concepts of like your services have owners and they determine like how access is dished out for their services, rather than the directory or which directory you're in, or some sort of concept of that determining what privileges you actually get. So the role of RBAC, having sort of role-based access control and saying, well, this person has this role as indicated by their group membership or position in the directory, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they've got automatic access to everything that role could imply. It doesn't mean they can log into every workstation in the place. So anyway, having digressed on that point, when we talk about identity and storing identity, we usually end up with this concept of a directory. So some sort of extensible database. So the idea that we need to store stuff in a database so it's indexed so it can be retrieved quickly, and so there's some sort of schema. But we also need to extend that schema, most likely with information that's pertinent to that entity, user, machine, whichever thing that it is that we're describing in that entity. And we're not necessarily talking about, although we might be talking about in the next few slides, sort of an Active Directory, a Microsoft Active Directory, or any specific kind of product there. A directory can be a lot more generic when we're talking about identity management. And you may well already have one or more. You might be doing something quite sophisticated with one. You might be doing something quite sophisticated with several. And you might be wondering how, if you haven't already, you can exercise some of this information in the cloud and make this stuff work across disparate systems, or perceived to be disparate systems, which hopefully won't be too disparate by the time we're finished thinking about this subject. So when we talk about the cloud, the suggestion that actually that every time we see cloud, you sort of substitute the phrase somebody else's computer. So let's extend our identities, which is things that we trust and concepts that we understand about people and the trusted individuals at our organisation, and other entities and devices and stuff into the cloud. Let's take all that stuff and bang it onto someone else's computer to say, right, we're going to process it here now. Let's take our password hashes. Let's if we're using passwords, which would, despite a lot of initiatives not to, we likely are, and even potentially the seeds for our multi-factor authentication, which are glorified passwords, if you like. Any MFA, software-based MFA, is going to have some sort of seed which can just be copied and pasted in theory. And we could be doing this in a sort of a lift and shift, moving to cloud native, moving to the cloud wholesale kind of way. We could be doing this extension and this building our identity management in the cloud using one of the various AAS acronyms. So infrastructure as a service, or it could be platform as a service, or software as a service implementation. So someone could be running it for you. You've seen the pizza analogy. I don't need to give you a whole other presentation on different types of as a service cloud implementations. That the subject is covered elsewhere in our material, if not others. There are different integration mechanisms and different ways for these things to interoperate. So there are directory access protocols. There's old school things that are still in use, like Radius. There are newer school things that are seeing good levels of adoption, like SAML, SAML2. Where I'm not going to go into the details of what all of these things are, but essentially they're different ways of saying, hey, here's my identity and some information about my identity, and I'm going to pass it to another system for processing and or authentication. APIs, so I've put this here as a reminder of what I was going to talk about, and obviously that's supposed to remind me of something. So essentially, a cloud-based identity system will have some concept of an API, some way of getting programmatically stuff in and out of it, which we can leverage, and attackers can leverage, presumably. And that brings us on to different attack surface. So a cloud-based identity management system is most likely, in a lot of cases at least, is accessible to everyone in the world. So your attack surface, compared to you sitting at your desk authenticating to a server in the next room or the next building, is different. There aren't borders here. There's no kind of perimeter, if you like. The tenancy models may differ. You could be sharing this with someone else. You're either a tenant on a shared identity management platform, or you've got your own thing that you've built, but it might serve more than one organization or more than one business unit or style of thing. It's never going to be. We're moving away from simple one-to-one relationships when we start buying things from other people and implementing them. And what comes with that is a shared responsibility model. So the thing that Amazon always talk about of, here are our cloud services. They're intrinsically safe and secure, which is something that I would question, but not something you can do an awful lot about if you use them properly. And if you use them properly, and if you use them the way that we tell you to do, follow our best practices and our guidelines and stuff, then you'll probably be okay, because we're taking care of the bit of actually making sure the services work and are secured in the correct fashion. So what do we sort of need? What are we trying to glean from this? We want a cloud identity service. We need to provide a robust way to verify the identity of entities. Thanks, Paul. Wishing to authenticate to cloud resources, but potentially also non-cloud resources. If we're moving everything, if we're changing wholesale to the cloud, to this cloud identity service, then some of our on-prem or traditional or incumbent services might need to authenticate to this stuff as well. And it needs to return enough authoritative information. I think the authoritative bit is important. Some metadata about the entity, its entitlements, not necessarily what it has access to, but the group memberships that lead to what it has access to, and who it belongs to, if you like. Especially if the entity isn't a user, like what user controls or owns that potentially. Its active status. So, is this account, is this user, is this entity enabled, disabled? Is it eligible to log in? Where the concept of login might be a fairly abstract thing. And then for downstream services, for things that consume the identity platform or identity service or identity infrastructure to make decisions about access and keep us all sort of safe and secure, but with people having access to the things and other entities having access to the things that they need to do the manual or programmatic tasks that they're assigned to them. Okay, so that's the first part. That's the waffle at the beginning. That's what what setting the scene, what we're trying to do. So here are the sort of 6, 7 numbers a bit fuzzy options, ideas, kind of patterns, if you like. I think patterns is a good word. How you might extend your identity to the cloud or implement identity in the cloud. And I think this first one is more of an example of implementing new identity management in the cloud. Is not necessarily the case that this is how you would extend a sort of enterprise identity management to a cloud. This is potentially a pattern for newer kind of new business or a new project or something. I won't read through every single bullet point on each of the slides, verbatim, but the pros and cons here, anyone can create an account on Google or GitHub, and that's a double-edged sword. And you can't stop them, and maybe you can't kill that account if it's behaving badly, or you can't, you're not controlling the lockout parameters, password policies and stuff. You use completely public identities for your system users. You can set some policies, especially in for example, GitHub, if you want people that contribute to your ecosystem to have multi-factor authentication turned on. A lot of them have that kind of concept. And then users can choose their own kind of how they want to be recognized or known on the system. They don't necessarily have to use an email address that matches first name, not surname, a handle that represents their name and some other personal metadata. They can call themselves Bob Smith 57 when actually their name is Sean Turner, and you can't do much about that. In these systems, you need to find a way of matching those users, those personas to your to what you actually identify as them. So that's sort of one-to-one, one-to-many kind of problem. Users can have multiple accounts. There are often some contention around whether users create accounts on these systems to use in conjunction with your services. In the software development space with GitHub, it's fairly ubiquitous, but it's a bit of a fuzzy area, and it's an interesting way of sharing identity information, and provides a very convenient mechanism, but often blurs the line between personal and corporate identification. Obviously, you only have one identity, but you have multiple personas, and your personal and corporate ones may differ in some ways. There's potential for embarrassment and some egg on face there as well. It can work really well for decentralized purposes, community projects and stuff, and some of the stuff that I work with day to day uses this kind of identity, but then some of the stuff I also work with is more private, and we don't use this system. So yeah, that's a pattern. It's a potential target for doing something relatively cheaply and easily, but has plenty of caveats, as I think we're going to find with all of them. So this is more of a requiring a level of maturity option. So using open standards yourself, as opposed to paying someone else to host things that support these open standards, extending your own identity management systems, extending either your provisioning or your directories to say, well, we now accept cloud logins via these services, via these standards. So you're still tied, back to your directory, and if you are a larger organization, you've got the engineering capability to implement stuff like this, and you've already got like a mature existing identity system, which a lot of really people with lots of users tend to have. But the amount of effort involved in achieving this isn't necessarily going to be a good fit for a 25 to 250 user organization. It's potentially more of a, I'll say, grown-up approach, but it's something where you would understand generally if this was going to be the pattern that fitted your use case. But your users are there are many of them, and they're close to the services, or you don't have many users, and a lot of but most of your identities are actually machine users or something. Might also be where organizations tend to shy away from per user costs when it comes to machine users and automation, because there's no kind of headcount to associate the cost with a subscription with. So yeah, historically works quite well for the larger orgs with that engineering capability. Higher education has used this in the past and said, hey, trust us, because we're a large organization that signs things to say that our users can log in. And it's been used for some national scale stuff on the HE, and probably international scale stuff as well. Okay, so now we get into, so 3 and 3B are very, although I've said about the directory caveat at the beginning, they're largely Active Directory centric. So you can synchronize your directories into the cloud, into a cloud, into a cloud directory hosted by Microsoft, into Azure AD. This product to do this has had various names. I think when I last used something like it, it was Forefront Identity Management, and it's probably called Entra today, and it's had 4 or 5 different names in between. And it gives you quite a high level of control, although not necessarily granularity. I think depending on what you subscribe to and what features you have, it gives you that one advantage of doing something like this, so 3 or 3B, where the federation or the synchronization approach, where you've got an on-premise estate, where you've got your own infrastructure and you've got a cloud infrastructure, is that your identity management system, the directory services, etc., they're going to be co-located with the services the users are signing into. So if they're signing in on-prem, they're going to be authenticating to an on-prem directory. If they're signing into the cloud, they're going to be authenticating to a cloud directory. So again, if you've got lots of users and they're on a site, and you control that infrastructure for security or operational resilience purposes, maybe this is a good answer. Again, works well for people with mature existing directory services implementations. If you're completely net new, greenfield, you're probably not going to start looking at this in the first instance. The cons there they're in black and white. They're fairly obvious. The password change and recovery thing and the incremental cost are kind of tied in a little bit, but specifically the feature to change your password from a public cloud directory within the on-premise directory is a paid feature or an additional cost feature. And there'll be various other bits of this that have licensing implications and costs, because it's the vendor that I described at the beginning. Again, this is a slightly similar but actually very different technically pattern of federating. So actually saying, well, look, here's a directory, and this directory fundamentally trusts this other directory. And honestly, this stuff 10 years ago was cutting edge, and this was a way that stuff like this was done, and people would have multiple directories, and they'd have, for example, a directory for telco and a directory for workstation logins, a directory for servers, and never the three shall meet kind of thing. It can be a good mechanism for transferring some control to different administrators and stuff, but realistically, I would prefer a unified directory approach, and to solve the problems, solve the cons on the other slides around those. But like I say, there will be organizations where this type of pattern, this kind of like, this directory trusts another directory, or this directory is sourced from this directory or provisioned from this directory, and the whole sort of identity flow concept is useful and can provide the the capabilities that you need. The fourth one's quite an interesting one. So if you've got a bunch of stuff on-prem, where we say on-prem, colo, you're running your own directory services somewhere, and you need to bridge identities to the cloud, there are products that do exactly that. I could only really find one good example of a product that does that. They seem to be the market leader, as far as I can tell. But they're the people that do this. And they've given us, the considerations on their own website. They've said, look, extending Active Directory in this way, my words, not theirs, isn't for everyone. And if you're able to, we encourage you to leverage a cloud-based directory exclusively, future-proof, and doesn't require you changing on your on-prem stuff and manipulating stuff and continuing to update and change things on premise. But it could be a fantastic stopgap. They've obviously got they've obviously built a viable business on doing this and specializing in this. So I believe it to be a good product. I've not used it, but like Paul pointed out, it's more of an authentication bridge than an identity provider. They're not hosting an IDP for you. They're hosting a way of translating your existing IDP to different protocols. And you can see that can be useful to glue stuff together. Like I say, that's why it's described as a glue identity provider. And then potentially your project will incorporate the concept of revisiting some of this stuff later, and moving more to the cloud with identity at the same time as you move more to the cloud systems, if indeed that's what you're doing. And if you're going sort of fully hybrid, then maybe this is one of the approaches that works for you. This one's a bit of a throwing a spanner into the works one, but a company administered password manager. So the idea that people can generate and kind of own the passwords for the services that they want to use. You manage the accounts, but they manage probably like a long and secure password for each of the services they sign into via a company administered password manager. And then the idea being that you can, if someone leaves, you can revoke their access to the password manager and then presumably disable their accounts as well, but with a slight disjoint in those processes. So this is sort of a manual management option for like how you can do identity management in a smaller in a smaller business on a budget. But I think there's an argument to say that you should probably have a company administered password manager anyway. And you might find that some services that you can't integrate with properly, that don't support SSO, but the business has indicated that you still need, and or that have incredibly interesting licensing implications for SSO. Let's say, for example, having to pay a license for all your users, even though only a subset use it, or just having exorbitant pricing for SSO capabilities. This type of thing can be leveraged for all types of business. For, like say, something where maybe the marketing team use a tool that doesn't support SSO, but they really, really need it, and they represent 4% or 2% of a workforce. If everyone has it, then you can push out and encourage kind of a better password management practices for things that people log into. There are some caveats, and policy decisions around like, well, you should probably not use the same password as your workstation, and not automatically unlock this stuff, and not use lots of fancy plugins that make things like MFA easier. But they're outside the consideration of this talk. So I think it's a good thing. What it isn't is a comprehensive identity management system for a larger organisation. And if it's used for shared accounts to save on licensing and stuff like that, again, great idea if you're an SMB, if you're a startup, and you need to do that for reasons. But that's not the right answer from a compliance and security perspective for most purposes. say you could say that something isn't that critical and you're prepared to do it because it's expensive. It might also be contrary to some licensing agreements, so it's an interesting one to watch out for. Cool. Okay, so we're getting there. Timing wise, we're doing okay. So we've got like a pair of options here. So there's a more sophisticated option, and then there's the harder work option, which I've kind of put as the primary one. So the idea of like what we're going to do is our incumbent estate, we're either going to sort of leave it there where it is and have two identity providers, which isn't ideal, but can be like a cutover type approach, or we're going to integrate back from a brand new cloud IDP, nice shiny thing that we're going to use. We're going to integrate back, and we're going to use the LDAP and the Radius plugins of our cloud IDP, and we're going to make the on-prem, the existing estate stuff work with the cloud IDP, so that we don't have to, reinvent the wheel on both sides of the coin. To mix some metaphors for a change. So you're getting your cloud native identity. You're getting what the jump cloud people sort of recommended that you do. Fully leverage a cloud-based directory. It uses most of the stuff uses some open standards under the hood, and you'll find that it interoperates with cloud services and even non-cloud services fairly seamlessly, and has good authentication options and controls and a good level of resilience in terms of people attacking the identity platform. Although it's quite a popular thing at the moment, and it's how it is interestingly how the casino group in the US was hacked recently, but they did some things wrong. So in the same way as the shared responsibility model, when it comes to your cloud provider, use it, but use it correctly. It could be quite a large amount of work, where if you've got a large incumbent estate where work implies some cost, there's a little bit of additional supply chain risk. Your vendor list now includes one of these cloud IDP providers, and that's key to logging in everywhere. But like I say, generally their resilience is quite good. There could be some disruption and relearning on the user side. There's an incremental per user cost. Pretty much all of this stuff is licensed per user, and you'll need some on-prem infrastructure to remain to make the on-prem integration bit work, but potentially less from the other direction, where you have to carry on running all your own directory and identity management services. So like I say, incredibly well if you're starting from scratch. If you're greenfield, I'd go for this. The last three places I worked used Okta, to be honest, and two of those are hybrid environments and have on-prem services as well. But if you are thinking of moving wholesale to the cloud, or maybe moving wholesale to a cloud IDP is just the obvious answer. Or if you're doing a fully hybrid thing, this or the following option. So if you're truly hybridizing and you've got lots of things already that are plugged together that interoperate, then the idea of an IDP that can talk to other IDPs and become part of kind of an identity engine, for want of a better expression. I mean, it's been coined by both of these companies, it seems. The concept of something that's so pluggable and so interoperable. I'm running out of words here, near thesaurus. That you can take your existing stuff and just plug it all in, and it will work. Cons are only really happening at the network level, but I mean, I think that's a bit of digression, and it probably leads us on to the next talk quite well, in terms of like, okay, what do we mean by that? What are we saying is happening here in terms of device authentication and posture management, zero trust, the concept of brokering access and controlling access to things, as well as authentication to things. All of that stuff, outside the scope of this talk, please tune into the next one, kind of thing. Some increased attack surface and some incremental cost. I mean, you're plugging all this stuff in. You're net adding something here. You're still going to need potentially that IDP in the cloud and the IDP on premise, and then you're going to have this identity engine that understands these things, or supplants in some cases. Like I said, this pattern could work well. It's the last pattern considered here. I'm not saying it's the right pattern for you. And if you can do something like this, it's probably easier going forward, and doesn't give you that sort of, again, it's a different vendor lock-in, isn't it? If you find something that uses open standards and you can consume as a service, I think those are facets that. Sorry, I've kind of moved on to my conclusion, so I'll move the slides on. But if you can find something that allows you to consume open standards as a service, your vendor lock-in is not dramatic, and with a lot of these platforms, you can get the identities in and out. You could use Okta to provision identities in Ping, or provision an AD and move away from a cloud identity altogether. And vice versa, I guess. A lot of these tools are becoming more extensible, and you can mold them to do what you need them to do. And I think that there's a fantastic and fascinating landscape of tools out there now, that you could use to solve these problems and consider these problems in the context again of the context of the first three talks, and what identity is and how it should be managed, and also like the more technical detail given in this talk of like how you go about thinking about integrating things. And that's me. Next in the series, leveraging identity for zero trust. That will go into the considerations around this only happens at the network level, and what we allow people to access in the first place, and where our perimeters are, if we have any perimeters, and ideally, obviously, not really having a perimeter as such. And then the talk after that should be interesting, because that's going to deal with what happens next. That's been me. Thank you all, and Paul, for basically seeding a bunch of content for this talk, and allowing me to put it together a little bit easier than it would have been.
You're welcome.
Without that information.
Brilliant.
Fantastic.
Brilliant talk. Well done, Sean. Thanks, everyone. See you next week, 12:30. Talk number 5.
See you next week.
Care. Bye.
Cheers.